I'm going to start out talking a little bit about my work, just very briefly give you an introduction to see kind of where I've come from and how I've arrived at where I'm today and what I'm thinking today. I grew up in Wisconsin. I spent a lot of time outside, camping, at lakes, swimming, and staring up at sleeping under the stars. That was a big part of who I was. It formed my identity, kind of being connected to this natural environment. And then I moved to Florida, and I moved to Miami in my early 20s. And I spent 15 years there, and I really developed who I am as an adult in Miami. So I'm kind of part of this weird mix of really being connected with the natural landscape, and then also with, you know, kind of the gloss of Miami. If you've ever been there, you know, there's a lot of neon, there's a lot of color. And I really was introduced to new media artwork, video, projections, you know, cutting edge new genre, and I really liked it, but I couldn't figure out how am I going to work with that? Because in grad school I had worked with natural materials. I was growing grass, I was working with sticks and rocks and leaves, and for me it ended up being light. Because the light that's coming from the stars is the same light that's produced artificially. And that was that connection, that was that in. And in Miami, with the light pollution, we don't see the stars there. And I used to drive by these buildings, you know, and I would imagine that those were kind of the stars. So it ended up bridging things together. And the first piece I did with light, I started using a lot of theatrical lights and patterns, mainly a Source 4, which is the most standard theatrical light that's out there, and they call it a gobo pattern. It's the pattern that goes inside and projects different images. And in this piece, I was projecting the stars on the outside of the gallery from that direction and that location, and thinking about how we couldn't see them. So I began to, at that time, really think about making the invisible visible, and things that exist but just beyond our perspective. And on the inside of the gallery, I had 20,000 marbles with more patterns, and they were all glowing as if they were kind of their own little star. And this piece is called Those Lost and Forgotten. And I was really thinking about the beauty of aspiration. Whether or not we achieve every dream we have, it still remains beautiful. And whether or not every person we love loves us back, our love is still beautiful. And sometimes they become like little dust bunnies, but they're still glowing. So that was kind of the idea with that piece. I continued to work with the marbles too, because the marbles immediately brought up childhood memories. Almost everyone has played with marbles at some time. And so that idea of having something very personal, yet that could speak on a much more universal level, so beginning to think about the micro-macro relationships was starting to fold, although I didn't quite even have a language for that at that time. Another piece that I did is called Full to Whaling and Back Again. So especially in Miami, where you've got all this neon and lights, people forget to look at the moon. And you know, there's also that notion that people were saying technology leads you away from nature. And I thought, well, perhaps in the right context, it could guide you back to it. So I projected the moon, started on the night of a full moon, and every day it was changed for 28 days. And so when people would drive by, it would be different, and people would immediately look up at the sky, and it was matching the sky. Everyone thought that I was somehow recording what was there. But it's, you know, living in Miami and real close to Disney, this was the full moon was a stock item I could buy, and I just made the modifications and do it. So, you know, and for me, I like that kind of layered concept of that. And what has been so amazing to me is I have so many people I know who say, you know, I drove by that building and I thought of your moon piece, or I saw the moon last night and I thought of you. And so it was really interesting what happened with memory, and that people seemed more likely to look at the moon after this, which was beyond kind of my wild expectations. So in working with the marbles, I've done a number of kind of sculptural pieces, again, you know, that micro-macro. And so because of the pattern, that gobo pattern that's in the theater light, that's where I could pinpoint it onto each of the marbles, and they become their own little stars. I then worked with geometry based on, by John Martineau, who discovered that every pair of planets, as they're traveling around the sun, also have unique patterns, and I had contacted him and asked him if I could use his geometry, and he said I could. This is, some of them were quite large, and here's a little boy figuring out that the light is coming from above rather than below. I also, about that time, had gone to Israel and became really fascinated with the rock. Now, the rock is our oldest book. The rock, some rocks aren't even from this planet. Rocks are at the heart of wars, at the heart of mythologies. They can protect us if they're made into homes. They can hurt us if they're turned into weapons. And we have an unending history to learn from the rock. And so I covered the rock with the disco ball mirrored tiles, because disco ball, again, something familiar, something that could stir kind of personal memories. But I was also interested in a single object creating an entire installation. A lot of my shows, sometimes I'll have one piece. And before I turn the lights on when I'm bringing it in, sometimes the curators will be like, wait, that's so small. Wait, you don't have anything else that you're putting on? I'm like, just wait, it'll be okay. It's actually been a problem sometimes. But I love that idea of having just a single object or a few objects to fill a space. So I continued with this. I've covered trees. That's like a water spigot, kind of water pouring down from the back there. And the light bounces all around. And I love this picture. One day I wandered in and people were staring at my piece as if they were staring at the sky at night. And so that also, because the light is reflecting from different sources, when you walked in front of it, it didn't create a silhouette. It just kind of made everything shimmer. So the viewers are the ones that made it come alive. If no one was in there, it was static. The minute someone was in there, they would break up the space and there would be light just kind of bouncing and moving around. I've also used mirrored mylar to create a similar effect, and I've made over 50 trees, and I'm continuing to make trees, although at the moment I'm kind of making some severed trees, which is, so there's sometimes that kind of eerie connection with things. As I was looking at your photo of your tree, I was thinking, I'm doing a couple series right now of tree trunks that have been severed. But so I'm using the mirrored mylar. It bounces just like it would a disco ball, but because it's more organic, the light pattern also becomes organic. This is a recent piece I did last year in a cabin, in a historic cabin in Utah, and it's a tree that is kind of fallen down as if it's shattered, and captured this moment of shatter. This is acrylic mirror made for the bark, and just with a few spotlights filling the room. Some of the other trees I've done using the mirrored mylar don't always require a dark room. These pieces are called Still Searching. I started making these trees when I was on a residency not too far from here, but on the ocean, and so they became very aquatic. And then I made another one that they're all suspended from the ceiling that reminds me of jellyfish. This is called In Bloom. And in thinking about some of the work that I was doing, I also began to kind of think about our explorations on other planets. You know, if we destroy this one, and what are they going to look like? And they have kind of this familiar aspect, but also strange. So this is a video. So kind of trying to be eerie, trying to be, it depends on where you focus. If you focus on the calm at the bottom, or kind of the real kind of terror at the top, so to speak. I am really thinking of, there's going to be two components to it, and some of it is still in progress, but one component is going to be on campus. It's going to be more sculptural. It's going to be a physical experience for the viewer. The viewer needs to go and walk on campus in order to experience it. That's why I'm going to be working with Wynn and his students in identifying certain areas. And the second component is going to be in the gallery, and that's going to be more of a digital component and more of a water component. So this idea of thinking of land and water, and thinking of real physical experiences and virtual experiences through sound and video and light. And so that's kind of how I'm thinking about it right now. Some of the other stuff is still developing, but there may be a map. We'll leave it at that. So yeah, she asked if the Hurricane Irma and the delay of my first visit has influenced what I might do. It's certainly something that I'm very aware of. And some parts of it I had been thinking about before. I think it's giving me a little bit of greater understanding in terms of this idea of some of the severed trees that I'm working with. and certainly how I see things. You know, and I've been driving around a little bit and certainly noticing the loss of tree limbs, and for some people, you know, all the furniture from the house is out front, and you know, there's so much more kind of coming into that. I don't know exactly, because that part of it with some of the water I hadn't quite formulated. So now it will be formulated with this information and this experience for sure.